and the impacts felt across society, but also the hope that all of these projects you're working on bring us because we're going to understand how to mitigate that risk better. Mitigating or moving that greater understanding into practice and mobilizing all this knowledge to achieve coexistence with wildfire is going to be a challenge and is not something one sector or agency or one way of thinking can do on their own. We have hope because the development of this Center of Excellence is an opportunity to level up our knowledge exchange in wildfire in Canada as one step in a whole of society approach to wildfire resilience. And I don't want to waste 1 second. Thank you for hanging in there today to do a little bit more learning. We need to connect diverse audiences, break down silos, preventing effective knowledge exchange, and build bridges across sectors and other barriers to strong communication. I think we can modify our approach to knowledge exchange to have a greater impact together. And I'm eager to share a few of ideas with you today that I hope will make your work have a greater impact with those you hope to reach. I want to start first with a story that I think represents the experience of some folks as they come to us looking for more knowledge. They are probably very knowledgeable in their own sectors, and they need some research or new wildfire science knowledge. They come to us for help, looking for knowledge that can help them make a better decision. And because we're so passionate about our work, we dump the entire bucket of wildfire knowledge on them, a whole database of peer-reviewed literature right on their head. This experience can be kind of a shock, like someone getting drenched with a bucket of cold water. And they end up quite turned off. Instead, imagine that when this person comes to us, we ask them what knowledge they're looking for. And then we dip into our bucket and we hand them just a glass of it. And they take a sip and their thirst is quenched and they feel very satisfied. And now they trust us. We've built trust with them. And we can go one step further and say, how did you like that knowledge? Hopefully they did like it, but they might mention that next time we could put a little lemon in the water. And so we can go back to our work in building knowledge or in developing communication tools and adjust the flavor of our communication just a bit to suit our audience a bit better. Before I get into a few ideas of how to do that, I just want to introduce myself a little bit. I'm fortunate to live here in Secwépemc territory in nearby Salmon Arm, but I grew up in rural Alberta. My mom, Susan, did research and development in crop insurance, making farming more resilient to hail and drought. And my dad was a conservation biologist. So I had the opportunity to grow up on the land, learning to love the land and steward it. And that curiosity led me to study science at the U of A. I later became the outreach coordinator there and had the opportunity to scale up a science outreach program to over 35 communities all across northern Alberta. I would go for weeks at a time and teach in places as far north as Inuvik. And we were co-designing those programs with community, asking them what they needed, and then trying to make experiential learning opportunities that integrated local knowledge as well as Indigenous knowledge. I had the opportunity to teach in Fort Chipewyan one time, and some experiences there made residential schools and intergenerational trauma very, very personal and very real for me. And that's where my journey of reconciliation began. And so I've been doing my best to learn and unlearn ways of working and teaching and sharing knowledge that are more responsible, reciprocal, and respectful. After that adventure, and with my partner, Matthew Pyper, who you've already met, we've been connecting knowledge to practice with our company Fuse for the last 12 years. And we've had the pleasure of mobilizing the research of many of the people in this room into infographics or toolkits or guidebooks. And then I also have worked with similar knowledge exchange partnerships. So this crazy word consortium is something that I've been through before, the National Boreal Caribou Knowledge Consortium, and also the Canadian Conservation and Land Management Knowledge Network and the IPCA Knowledge Basket. And I'm really honored now to be working alongside the WRCC team as a helper, leading the Knowledge Mobilization Core while still supporting all my other clients. Let's jump right in. Whether we call it knowledge exchange or extension or mobilization, or Andrew Gissing taught me a new word last night in Australia, they say utilization, we're all seeking to address a common problem, which is that often carefully planned research ends up on a shelf like this, instead of in the hands of people who need it. And I heard from someone very, very sort of sad about where her research has gone already today and feeling discouraged that it wasn't having more impact. One approach we can do to help get this research off the shelf and into practice is to summarize and synthesize and translate it into visuals, bringing those key takeaways into something like a communication tool. But the work doesn't stop there. In order to have an impact, I think we need to think of knowledge exchange as a cycle. And someone earlier today put up another beautiful cycle. I think it was Justin, very similar to this one I'm going to walk you through now. Instead of thinking of knowledge dissemination as a one-way communication or a lecture, we want two-way dialogue, building trust and sustaining long-term relationship with our target audience. We need to start by understanding the knowledge needs of that target audience. Then think about your research from the outsider's perspective and ask, so what? What's the key takeaway of my research? Why does it matter? This is your core. And then you need to make it credible. You need to tell a complete story. So we're going to add some concrete and credible evidence to that. And then once you have this good communication tool ready, you need to take it out into community and start conversations. Use it to improve your engagement. And during those conversations, make sure you're listening as much as you're talking, and then taking what you hear back and informing your research. I know here at TRU Wildfire, I think they say research to practice, practice to research. So first we connect, and hopefully eventually we're co-creating projects that start from the needs of our end users. It could be that your work wasn't as applicable as you originally thought, or maybe it wasn't as culturally sensitive as it could be. And also maybe there's a new knowledge gap that you can help fill. Let's start at the first step of identifying the knowledge need. I hope that I can make this concrete and something you can take home and use. For example, are you targeting a park ranger? Is that your target audience? Delivering programming to children? Or a local forest professional? Or is it a tree hugger actively campaigning to protect the forest? Maybe, like the WRCC, you have a long list of target audiences, and you'll need many different communication tools and formats. By taking the time to think about who we want to reach, we can choose the right content, what we put in that glass, and the flavor of our communication. Getting to know your audience can involve extensive engagement, focus groups, and lots of time and money. And when those activities are within your budget, they're very important to pursue. It gives you that concrete data about what your audience values and believes and knows, and who they think are trusted messengers. But a simpler approach of asking yourself some questions can go a long way in understanding your audience's needs. What do they know? What do they want to know more about? What do they value? What motivates them? And why would they care? The harder part, from my experience, is keeping all of these needs, all the answers to your self-reflection questions, top of mind. Not just at the communication stage, but in even how we design our projects and what research questions we pursue. Next step is to find the core of your message. So again, think about your research from an outsider's perspective. What are the key takeaways that you want your audience to know? Simon Sinek is a master communicator who talks about the golden circle. In his book, Start With Why, he shares that this outer ring is the what, the results. And we're all very good at talking about the what. The next ring is the how, the process of how we got there. And some of us can get into the how, but very few of us are actually able to effectively communicate our why, the purpose or motivation behind what we do. So we need to work on that, getting better at thinking about the so what, the larger purpose of what we do, the management implications, the applications. What impact can this knowledge have? Because we have no time to waste in wildfire. Once you've found the core, don't hide it. In scientific disciplines, we often are taught to treat our writing and approach our communication in a really defensive way. So we start with the background and context, and then we add the important details. And finally, at the end, we share our conclusions. So the outcome is that our reader has to go through all of this technical information before they get to that conclusion. In journalism, they flip this around in what is called the inverted pyramid, and they put the core messages first. Why is this relevant to your audience? Next, they add the important details that help make it concrete and credible. And then at the end, add that background and context just to fill in any gaps. The outcome is that if you have an audience with low focus or in a rush, and they don't read right to the bottom, at least they've taken away those core messages that you really wanted to make sure they took away. So we have our core, but we believe it's really critical to go one step further and develop all of your key messages. Whether you're creating something that's going to be a visual or purely text, whether it's a one-page infographic, a 30-page report, or a PowerPoint presentation. The key messages are the scaffolding that outline what you need the audience to come away with. So first we start with why. Why should they care? Before the reader spends any time sorting through technical information, we need to establish that the content relates to the things they care about. Or else why should they invest the time to read further? The next step is really where the heavy lifting begins. We have our whole bucket of knowledge, and we have to sort through it, depending on our target audience, and pull out the most important pieces. As I mentioned, these are different for different target audiences. If you're sharing your research with other researchers, then they may need to know about your methodological approach or the statistics or how they could replicate the study. But if you're sharing your research and findings with a practitioner audience, you want to make sure that those important details are not the what, but really more the why and details that they can act on. Next, you want to give them a way to learn more. So hopefully we've piqued their curiosity now, and they're ready to have a conversation with us. They're ready to reach out and contact you for more information or to tell you what they think about that, or maybe to read your whole research paper. Tell them what's next and where to find out more. Make it concrete and credible. We need to tell that complete story. Our audiences are bombarded with conflicting messaging from different sources all the time. And as you keep seeing in the center of my cycle, we are trying to build trust. So we need them to believe our expertise. Sometimes as scientists, we try to convey credibility by using correct, precise terms or showing lots of data and numbers and including all of our stats and modeling. And that is important for another researcher audience. But if you think of that story at the beginning, for our non-expert audience, that could feel like getting doused with a whole bucket of information all at once. That could really have the opposite effect of building credibility and trust. There are 3 ways that I'm going to share with you next that we can make our numbers more concrete. Because on their own, statistics and data don't mean that much to your audience if they're not within your own research field. So here are 3 things that you can start doing tomorrow to help make your numbers and your findings more concrete. 1 is to provide a reference point. 2 is to use relationships for statistics. And the 3rd is to develop visuals to explain concepts. We have some champions in knowledge extension here in the room, and they did a great job earlier today. But I'll share some examples with you also. So I've chosen a non-wildfire example here for 2 reasons. I don't want to offend anyone in the room, and I want you to have the experience of being a non-expert audience. Here we have an example number of 0.36 micrograms per gram, the mean concentration of mercury in walleye. Without a reference point, that means nothing to me, and it might not mean very much to you either. But if we provide that reference point that the commercial fishing limit is 0.5 micrograms per gram and 0.36 is below, all of a sudden the number becomes concrete. Here's another example of caribou herds with a bull-cow ratio of 58 to 100. Not a very concrete number. It doesn't really mean anything to me without some goalposts. So we just, in the same number of words, can add some goalposts that the minimum threshold is 35 to 100. In wildfire, we need to do the same thing, whether we're communicating fine fuel moisture codes or fire danger ratings or diameter at breast height. If we can provide a reference to that number, even what the number is on which scale, then everyone in the room can understand why we would share that number with them. It must have some significance, but often you can hear a number and really not know what you're supposed to mean, think about it. Next is presenting statistics. So most readers won't be able to interpret things like R-squared values, but they can understand relationships. So just transform your statistics into the direction of the effect. And I'll show this in 1 second. Is it doing it by a lot or a little? Here in this picture, in this infographic, we've transformed statistics into very simple arrows. Peatlands can protect neighboring uplands. And here, shown again with simple arrows, the general relative size of the effect. So vegetation is having a large effect, and climate is having a small effect. All of a sudden, those relationships mean something to our audience. So visuals are good. Now I just want to quickly talk about choosing the right visual. Often we're really excited to break up the text with anything other than text, and so we'll throw in a graph or a chart, but not all visuals actually help comprehension. In this example, it would be very hard even for someone within this field to interpret that graph and chart. And so we've transformed it into a visual of something that you can touch and feel. We've taken the key message out of that graph and illustrated what the plants actually look like. And then in bold letters, we've put that the raisin bush and camel thorn were the most common species. Very simple and concise and concrete. We also should be careful to use culturally appropriate visuals. How does your audience think about and represent their world? Many Indigenous cultures, for example, conceptualize time as a circular calendar and break up the seasons differently than we do with a Western calendar. Making the effort to present information this way not only makes for better communication and comprehension, but also shows an interest in learning and prioritizing their cultural values and ways of knowing. We're making an effort to build trust. So this is an example of that last visual transformed into a different format that represents the way of knowing of that nation. And finally, we want to reflect your audience authentically. It's good to show photos with people or illustrations with people, but it's important to make sure that you're representing the diversity that you intend to. What tools are they using? What clothing are they wearing? And are you leaning too heavily on old stereotypes? This is a visual we had the pleasure of making for Fort Nelson First Nation that's using these visuals to tell the story of how government fire suppression policies decreased cultural fire, combining that with climate change. We now have more frequent and intense fires. This visual helps make it concrete and connect to people's emotions, as well as transforming those numbers into simple arrows. I want to summarize by showing all of these in practice. So don't worry if you can't see everything on this one-page infographic. I'll just highlight the important things where we've connected with why, provided reference points that make things concrete, used relationships for statistics, and then developed visuals to explain concepts. So right up top, we're telling the story of how these municipalities and researchers are keeping people safe and wildlife connected. Now, by sorting through all that bucket of knowledge, we've pulled out 3 sentences of that core message, and it's right up top, black text on yellow. You can't miss it. If you don't read the whole thing, at least you're coming away with those core messages. Next, we've made it concrete by connecting people to place, the places they live and love. And then, instead of showing numbers, we're using very simple arrows that show decreased collisions, decreased cost, decreased mortality for wildlife. So we're just showing the relationships. And finally, we're leveraging visuals to tell this story. So now we have communication tools that are concrete, concise, and credible, but our work is not done. We have to go out and host conversations about the impact of the knowledge. Then we need to listen and adapt, build trust and relationships with our audience, and hopefully inform our next research projects so that we can identify the knowledge needs important to that audience. A tool is not the endpoint, but the beginning. So a thoughtful, well-written communication tool won't achieve very much on its own. You have to use it. I've talked a lot about building bridges, and if I'm building a real-life bridge and I decide to swap my manual screwdriver for a powered drill, I can build a bridge faster, but not if the drill sits in the box. A tool is just a tool. A better tool can help me build a bridge faster and easier, but I still need to build the bridge. Sometimes there's a debate in knowledge extension about whether it's building trust or communication tools, and I argue that it's really both. We need strong communication tools to support connection. They don't replace connection. We need to use those tools to enhance in-person engagement and build and maintain meaningful relationships. So I leave you with this idea that knowledge exchange is a cycle meant to build trust and relationships with our audience. And I applaud so many of the presenters and researchers today that were already incorporating a lot of these ideas. I really am eager to turn it over to you and hear about your target audiences. And I just want to leave you with one more idea. When and where does your audience most need this information? We heard already today about an interactive decision-making tool. And that's one example of the diversity of formats that are available to you now. We can go so much beyond the printed material. You could build something that practitioners access from a tablet right in the field, or put an interpretive sign out there where you want to do maybe some land-based learning. Remember that you'll be having in-person conversations. So while we always, joke about supporting the forestry industry when we print stuff, there is still a place for print material. We also heard about story maps today from Joe, and those online references are very important. I encourage you to go beyond downloadable PDFs and start to embed more of your material that's meant for reference. The interactive decision-making tools, like the one we heard about today, which I'm really excited to check out. And if you're trying to increase knowledge and skills in an area, you probably need a full-on immersive learning experience to truly change how people are going to act and what they're capable of. And finally, maybe you have knowledge or facts that you want people to copy and paste and share and put in their work. And so make sure it's easy for them to do that. Here's a few pictures of different formats that have been really successful. Excellent. Thank you so much for your attention. I know it is late in the day, Cook's Jam. And now, if you will, do a little bit of hard thinking so late in the day. On your tables, for those of you here in person, you have a little worksheet to help you think about these questions. And for those of you joining us remotely, and I thank you for anyone who's still logged on Eastern Time, it's getting to be pretty late, there should be a poll being launched for you so that you can also contribute. Cassandra is managing those Slido polls, and she's going to pull together a beautiful word cloud that we'll see in a second up on the screen. So think to yourself, who is my target audience? Write that down, and again, you may have many of them. And then turn to your partner and share. And we also will walk around with the mic if anyone would like to share with the group.